The first call came at 4:17 on a Tuesday while I was standing in line at a pharmacy buying cold medicine and cat litter. By 4:26, I had 20 missed calls. By 4:41, I had 38. My mother, my brother, my Aunt Renee. Two numbers I did not recognize, but knew how to be from back home because they all started with the same county code I had spent 7 years teaching myself not to flinch at. I had been no contact with my family for 7 years. Not low contact. Not holiday texts. Not the occasional guilty birthday message. Nothing. 7 years of silence. Then suddenly my phone looked like a fire alarm. The voicemail that made me stop walking came from a hospital social worker in Dayton, Ohio. Her voice was calm in that professional way people get when they already know the truth is bad. Miss Carter, your father has been admitted in critical condition. Your name is listed on legal medical paperwork. Your family says they've been trying to reach you. Please call us back as soon as possible. I stood in the automatic doors with cold air blowing in and out over my arms, and for 1 second the whole store blurred. Because I had not put my name on any paperwork. Not recently. Not willingly. The last time I had signed anything for my father, I was 25, still stupid enough to believe helping was the same thing as being loved. Back then, he had a surgery scheduled and needed an emergency contact. He promised he would update it later. Apparently, later had taken 7 years. I walked out without buying anything and sat in my car with the engine off. That was when my brother Nate texted, "Call me now. Dad is dying. Don't make this about yourself for once." That one line told me everything I needed to know. Not hello. Not I'm sorry. Not he wants to see you. Just the same family script, open to the same page, like no time had passed at all. I wish I could say, I felt nothing. I did not. I felt exactly what toxic family drama trains into you when you are the one who leaves, guilt first, anger second, and underneath both of them, that old dangerous hope that maybe this time the call is about love. It wasn't. And I knew that before I called back. Still, I called. Because when a hospital says your father is dying, silence starts to sound a lot like a decision you'll have to live with forever. My father, Raymond Carter, was not the kind of man people called cruel. That was part of the problem. Cruel men are easier to leave because they give you a story with sharp edges. My father was the softer kind of damage. The kind that smiles in public, pays for church repairs, and teaches everyone in town that his daughter is too sensitive long before she is old enough to name what is happening to her. My mother, Elaine, handled feelings by editing them. If something hurt, she called it misunderstanding. If something was unfair, she called it family stress. If someone lied, she called it keeping peace. And my older brother Nate? Nate was the son the whole house revolved around. He was charming, impulsive, always one mistake away from needing rescue. And somehow every rescue came with my name on it. At 19, I covered his rent, so he would not get evicted. At 22, I lied to our grandparents about why he dropped out of community college. At 24, I spent 6 straight Saturdays helping my dad keep the family hardware store afloat while Nate disappeared on sales calls that somehow always ended at bars. Then came the night that ended us. I was 26, doing payroll at the counter after close, when I found the missing money. Not a little mistake. Not a bad week. Nearly $14,000 gone in broken withdrawals, fake invoices, and vendor checks made out to cash. I already knew who had taken it. Nate never stole carefully. He stole like someone who thought love would clean up after him. I brought the records to my father that same night. He looked at the papers, looked at me, and said the sentence that changed my life. Fix it quietly. Not, thank you for catching this. Not, your brother crossed a line. Fix it quietly. He wanted me to move money around, delay payroll, and sign off on numbers I knew were false until Nate got himself straight. When I refused, my mother cried. Nate swore I was trying to ruin him. And my father said, in that low, tired voice that always made me feel like the unreasonable one, if family means so little to you, maybe you should go. So I did. I left 3 days later with 2 suitcases for $100 and a reputation they shredded before I even reached the state line. In our town, the story became simple. I stole from the store. I ran. And my family, apparently, had suffered enough. That was the last gift they gave me before 7 years of silence. So when Nate told me Dad was dying, understand this clearly. I was not returning to a broken home. I was returning to the scene of the lie that built my exile. The hospital called again before I made it to the airport. This time, the social worker sounded more direct. Ms. Carter, your father is asking for you specifically. Also, your name is still listed as his medical proxy if he loses capacity before new paperwork is filed. That almost made me laugh. Medical proxy. 7 years without a birthday card, but somehow still legally useful. I booked a flight for the next morning and a hotel room across town, not at the family house, not under anyone's control. That mattered more than I can explain. People think boundaries are emotional speeches. Most of the time, boundaries are logistics. Your own room, your own rental car, your own exit. I landed in Ohio under a sky the color of dirty dishwater and drove straight to St. Anne's Regional. My mother met me in the ICU waiting room, wearing a cardigan I recognized from before I left. She looked smaller, grayer, and for a split second I saw what grief had done to her. Then she opened her mouth. Thank God. Nate can't manage this, and I've barely slept. We need you to talk to the doctors. There it was. Not I missed you. Not your father has regrets. A task. A function. A familiar role with my old name taped over it. Nate was leaning against the vending machine with a paper cup in one hand and resentment written all over his face. You sure took your time, he said. I had been in the building less than 40 seconds. I looked at both of them, then at the closed ICU doors, and I felt something in me go cold and steady. 7 years earlier, I would have swallowed that room whole. I would have apologized for arriving at all. But time, distance, and therapy do change a person if you let them. So I said, I'm here to see Dad. I'm not here to resume my job in this family. Neither of them liked that.
Good.
A nurse brought me in alone. My father was thinner than I could have imagined. Oxygen under his nose. Skin gone almost waxy. The kind of sick that turns stubborn men into paper. I had prepared myself to feel rage. Instead, I felt something harder to manage. Recognition. No matter how long you stay away, your body still knows the shape of the person who made your world first. He opened his eyes when I sat down. He stared at me for a long second, like he was checking whether I was real. Then he whispered, You came. Not I'm sorry, but not nothing. And before I could answer, he shifted his hand weakly toward the drawer beside his bed.
There's a folder, he said.
Read it before they do. That was the moment I knew this was not just about a dying father. It was about what he was afraid would survive him. The folder was thick, old, and labeled in my father's block handwriting with just one word.
Truth.
Inside were photocopies of bank statements, vendor records, old payroll reports, and a handwritten note dated 6 months earlier, the month he had apparently been diagnosed. I sat in that ICU chair while machines beeped around us and read my own life being corrected on paper. The $14,000 from the hardware store. The fake vendor checks. The cash withdrawals. Every line traced cleanly back to Nate. My father had known. Not 7 years ago, maybe not fully.
But later, yes.
He had known. Buried in the back of the folder was the thing that made my hands shake, a signed affidavit from the store's retired accountant. He had come forward after reviewing archived records and put in writing that I had never stolen a cent, that the books had been manipulated after I left, and that my father had refused to reopen the matter publicly.
Refused.
Because protecting Nate had been easier than telling the town, he destroyed the wrong child to save the favorite one. Then I found the second envelope. It held a revised will, notarized 3 months before, and a letter addressed to me. My father had removed Nate from any control over the business. The store was to be sold.
Debts were to be paid.
A portion would go to my mother. The rest would be split between the grandchildren in trust. And me? I was named executor. Not heir. Executor. The one he trusted to finish what he had been too weak to fix while alive. I looked at him, and maybe he saw exactly what flashed across my face, because he shut his eyes and said, I know. That was the first honest thing he had given me. Not an excuse. Not a defense. Just I know. He took 2 breaths before he could go on. I should have stopped it. I kept thinking I could hold the family together one more month, then one more month after that. By the time I was ready to tell the truth, the lie had become the family. That line hit me harder than I wanted it to, because that is how toxic families work. One lie becomes two. Two become tradition. And eventually anyone who tells the truth looks like the threat. He asked me not to save Nate. He asked me not to let my mother pressure me into reopening the store. And then, with more effort than it should have taken, he said, "Do not move back here for guilt. If you help, help because you choose it." That was the closest thing to real apology I was ever going to get. Not perfect, not healing, but real enough to hurt. When I walked out with the folder, Nate stood up immediately. "What did he give you?" he asked. I said, "Something you should have been honest about 7 years ago." And for the first time since I had come home, my brother looked afraid. Part 5. My father died at 2:14 the next morning. Not while holding my hand. Not in some cinematic moment with everyone gathered and forgiven. He died after a rough hour, 2 medication changes, 1 failed attempt by my mother to make the night about her panic, and a final glance at me that said less than words and more than he had managed in years. Once the doctor called the time, the room changed instantly. That is another thing people do not tell you about death. Grief and administration arrived together. Before his body was even moved, Nate started talking about the store. Before the chaplain finished praying, my mother asked whether I had found anything important in the drawer. By sunrise, my aunt was asking if I would stay the week and handle the ugly parts. There it was again. That old family religion. Give the hardest thing to the child who still knows how to stand upright. But this time, I was not 26. I met the attorney at 10. He already had copies of the will, the affidavit, and instructions from my father to release everything the same day. My brother came in expecting sympathy. My mother came in expecting control. Instead, they got facts. The accountant's statement was read first. Then the bank records. Then the new will. Nate went white by paragraph 2 and red by paragraph 4. By the time the attorney explained that the store would be sold, not inherited, and that I had full authority as executor to settle debts and oversee the process, he was on his feet calling me a manipulative liar. The attorney did not even blink. "Your father signed these documents in front of witnesses," he said. "If you want to contest them, you may do so formally." My mother cried in that quiet, collapsing way she always used when reality stopped obeying her. Not over me. Not over the 7 years I lost. Over the humiliation. Over the town finding out. Over the fact that the son she protected had finally become too expensive to defend. Nate turned to me like I was still the easier target. "You're really going to do this now? While he's barely gone?" And I said, calm as still water, "No. He did this. He just made me the person who wouldn't bury it again." That was the room changing. That was the first time in my whole life I watched the lie lose oxygen. At the funeral, people looked at me differently. Some because they knew. Some because they suspected. Some because small towns can smell a corrected story before they hear it in full. I did not perform grief for them. I did not perform reconciliation either. I buried my father honestly. Then I opened the books. And the truth, once it finally gets a desk and a file and a signature, moves faster than guilt ever expects it to. I stayed 9 days. Not because my family needed me, because the work needed finishing. There is a difference, and learning it changed my life. In those 9 days, I locked the store accounts, notified vendors, met with the estate attorney twice, and arranged the sale process exactly the way my father requested. I also did one thing for myself that should have happened 7 years earlier. I asked for the public record to be corrected. Not through gossip. Not through shouting. Through paperwork. The accountant's affidavit, the settlement records, and the estate filings made it very clear that I had not stolen from the business. Nate had. Quietly, officially, and without a single dramatic speech, the stain they built my exile on started to wash off. My mother tried one last time the night before I left. She came to my hotel, stood just outside the lobby doors, and asked the question I think had been living inside her from the start. "Can't we be a family now?" It would sound tender to anyone who did not know her. But I did. What she meant was, can we go back to the arrangement where your pain costs less than our comfort? I told her the truth. We were a family. We were just one where truth had to leave first.
She cried.
I did not. Not because I was cold. Because I was done paying for honesty with my whole body. I flew home the next morning with one carry-on, one legal folder, and no fantasy left. That last part was the real inheritance. Not the paperwork. Not the authority. Not even the corrected record. The end of fantasy. The end of believing a dying parent automatically becomes a better parent. The end of confusing being needed with being loved. I sold the store 6 months later. The proceeds paid what had to be paid. The trusts for the grandkids were funded exactly as written. Nate got enough to prove the process had been fair and not enough to wreck anyone else's life again. My mother got stability, not control. And me? I went back to Seattle. Back to my apartment. Back to my quiet little Saturday mornings and the life I built after no contact saved me. Sometimes people ask whether I regret answering the phone.
No.
I regret who I had to become before I learned I could answer without surrendering. That is the whole lesson if there has to be one. Going back is not failure. Staying broken to keep the peace is. My family called because Dad was dying. They thought death would reopen the old contract. Instead, it closed it. For good.